The building had been abandoned for nearly 40 years, its floors rotted, windows shattered, and walls covered in dust and graffiti. But when an urban explorer stepped inside with a flashlight, they found something impossible: a gold wristwatch lying on the floor, still ticking, still warm. The year was 1984, and the town of Westover, Pennsylvania, tucked away in the Appalachian Hills, was the kind of place where everybody knew each other's middle names, and where doors were rarely locked at night. Ellie Blackwood was 17 years old, with an easy laugh and eyes full of wanderlust. She was a senior at Westover High, co-captain of the debate team, and had just been accepted to a journalism program in New York City. She came from a tight-knit, working-class family. Her dad, Frank, was a Vietnam veteran turned mechanic. Her mom, Diane, worked part-time at the local library. Ellie was their only child, and their world. Ellie had a habit of keeping a detailed journal, pages filled with ambitions, half-written poems, and small-town frustrations. She loved old buildings, especially the ones no one else cared about. That's how she found her favorite place in the world: a crumbling brick structure on the edge of town known as the Winthrop Textile Mill. The Winthrop Mill had been abandoned since the 1940s, left to rot after the textile industry collapsed. Most folks in Westover wouldn't go near it. The stories about the place were endless: strange noises, missing pets, shadows in the windows. Kids said it was haunted. Ellie, of course, was drawn to it. She called it my secret cathedral. In early November of 1984, just after daylight saving time ended, Ellie disappeared. It was a Sunday. Her mom remembered she had planned to go for a walk and clear her head. Her journal later revealed she was working on an article for the school paper about forgotten places in Westover. She left around 4:30 p.m. It was already starting to get dark. She never came home. At first, her parents assumed she'd lost track of time. But by 7 o'clock, they were calling friends. By 8 o'clock, Frank was driving around town. By 10 o'clock, the police had been notified. It would be the beginning of the largest missing persons search in Westover's history. They combed the woods, searched the riverbanks, and knocked on every door. The Winthrop Mill was searched too, but only briefly. According to police records, it was too structurally unstable to enter safely. They noted broken beams, sagging floors, exposed nails. It was chalked off as a no-go. A week went by. Then 2. Then a month. Posters were put up in neighboring counties. A segment aired on the local news. But nothing came. No leads. No sightings. No remains. Ellie's parents refused to move. Her room stayed exactly as it was, books still on the nightstand, backpack by the bed, and a gold wristwatch lying in the drawer. It had been a birthday gift from her grandmother, inscribed with a tiny message on the back. "Stay curious." Years passed. The case went cold. But nearly 4 decades later, in the summer of 2023, a group of urban explorers, documenting old abandoned buildings for their YouTube channel, stepped into the rotting shell of the Winthrop Mill. Among the debris, they found something the police had missed. Lying on the dusty floorboards beneath a collapsed staircase was a gold wristwatch. It was still ticking. And when they flipped it over, the inscription read, "Stay curious." In the weeks leading up to Ellie Blackwood's disappearance, there were small signs, subtle, easy-to-miss changes in her behavior. Nothing dramatic. Just a quiet shift, like the way the air changes before a storm. Her best friend, Rachel Hennessy, would later tell investigators that Ellie had become restless. She was more withdrawn at school, sometimes skipping lunch to sit alone in the library or scribble in her journal. When Rachel asked what was going on, Ellie brushed it off. "Just got something I'm working on," she said. According to her diary, which the family provided to police after her disappearance, Ellie had started researching the Winthrop Mill more seriously. She'd found a few newspaper clippings in the archives about its closure, but what really caught her attention were rumors tied to the mill's final days. A local legend told of a fire in 1943, officially blamed on faulty wiring, that had forced the mill to close. but Ellie's notes suggested she suspected something darker. In one entry, dated October 25, 1984, she wrote, "Something's off. There are 2 reports about the fire. One says it started in the East Wing. The other says West. And no names mentioned in either one. Why no interviews? Why no follow-up? I think people are scared to talk." Later entries grew more intense. "Found a name, M. Halperin. Only survivor of the fire. Can't find any record of where he went after. No obituary. No address. Just vanished. People in town know something. Mr. Colby at the library went pale when I asked about the mill. Said that place took too many people. What did he mean by that?" Then, in her final entry, dated the day before she disappeared, Ellie wrote only 5 words. "Tomorrow. I go inside. Alone." Ellie had never told anyone about her plan to enter the mill, not even Rachel. Her parents had no idea she'd been researching the building, or digging into local history. And without social media, there was no digital footprint to trace. After she vanished, her diary became the only thread investigators could follow. They interviewed library staff, town elders, and even a few people who claimed to remember the old fire. But the memories were hazy, conflicting. Many seemed afraid to say too much. One man, Roger Tibbetts, who had been a security guard in the 1960s, admitted he used to patrol the Winthrop property before it was fully condemned. He said something odd. Used to see lights in there sometimes. Flashlights. Or candles. Never found anybody. Just footprints. Teenagers, maybe. Or something else. But the case file shows no hard evidence of anyone else entering the building before or after Ellie's disappearance. And then, the years dragged on. Until the summer of 2023. The group of explorers, 3 young men in their 20s, had started a channel called Rust and Ruin, dedicated to documenting America's abandoned buildings. One of them, Trevor, found the mill while scanning old satellite maps. It looked perfect. Creepy, decayed, untouched. They brought cameras, masks, flashlights. The building was dangerously unstable, but they entered anyway, stepping over beams, dodging rusted nails, filming everything. In a collapsed stairwell on the 3rd floor, Trevor spotted something odd in the dust, a glint of gold. He assumed it was trash. But as he picked it up, he felt warmth. Not just from the sun, it was faint but real. The watch was running. The moment they flipped it over and saw the engraving, "Stay curious," they stopped filming. They called the police. The watch was confirmed to be Ellie Blackwood's. Somehow, nearly 40 years after she vanished, it was there, ticking, exactly where police claimed they couldn't search. But that wasn't the strangest part. The explorers had captured something else, unintentionally, on their camera audio. A sound, just before Trevor found the watch. A voice. Faint, high-pitched. Almost a whisper. The audio was analyzed by technicians at the Pennsylvania State Police Crime Lab. Enhanced. Slowed down. The voice said one word. Help. The discovery of the watch, and that haunting whisper on audio, reignited the investigation like a spark to dry tinder. Within days, the Pennsylvania State Police reopened the Ellie Blackwood case, this time with forensic specialists and modern equipment. Structural engineers were brought in to stabilize portions of the Winthrop Mill so that investigators could perform a full search for the first time in nearly 4 decades. The initial sweep focused on the area where the watch had been found. Beneath the collapsed stairwell was a narrow crawlspace, just big enough for someone to wedge into, but nearly impossible to escape without help. Inside, they found human remains. DNA testing confirmed the worst. It was Ellie. Her body had been trapped in that space, partially decomposed and preserved by the cold and damp of the old mill. Her journal was found nearby, pages waterlogged and rotted, but one sheet, protected inside a Ziploc bag, was still legible. On it, Ellie had written a short message, presumably in her final hours. Got stuck. Can't get out. No signal. Battery dead. Hear footsteps above. I think someone's here. There were signs she had tried to claw her way back out. Fingernail scratches were visible along the beams. But here's where things became strange. Despite Ellie's notes and signs of panic, investigators found no indication that the staircase she fell under had collapsed in 1984. In fact, historical blueprints and photos of the building, taken during an insurance inspection in 1993, showed that the stairwell was intact, almost pristine, nearly 10 years after Ellie vanished. So if the staircase only collapsed after 1993, how did Ellie get stuck under it in 1984? Investigators proposed a chilling theory. Someone had moved her body. That person had kept it hidden, perhaps in one of the mill's many sealed-off rooms, and only placed it under the staircase years later, after the building began to decay. This theory sent shockwaves through the community. It meant Ellie hadn't simply gotten lost or fallen. It meant there was a second person in that building. Someone who knew she was there. Someone who may have kept her alive for days, or longer. Further investigation uncovered more strange details. Detectives found faint remnants of wax on the floor in one of the mill's side rooms, melted candle stubs, arranged in a circle. They also found old Polaroid negatives, half-burned, showing blurred images of Ellie. Some photos had been taken at close range, as if she hadn't known she was being watched. There were fingerprints on the negatives, but they had degraded too much for identification. One partial print was recovered from a glass bottle in the same room, but it didn't match anyone in the national database. Then came a disturbing revelation from one of the oldest residents in Westover, Helen Kinnard, now in her 90s. Helen told police that in the late 1980s, she remembered seeing an unfamiliar man squatting in the woods behind the mill. She described him as scruffy, quiet, always watching. Locals assumed he was a drifter or Vietnam vet dealing with trauma. But when pressed, she remembered something else. He wore a gold watch. This suggested a new possibility. What if Ellie hadn't been alone in the building that night? What if she'd encountered someone, a squatter, a drifter, someone unstable, who had been living inside the mill? Police issued a new composite sketch based on Helen's recollection. The man would likely be in his 70s or 80s by now, if he was even still alive. A few leads came in, including one from a former nurse at a psychiatric facility 40 miles away. She believed a patient named Michael Halperin had once mentioned a girl named Ellie, years before her body was ever found. That name stopped detectives cold. Halperin, the same person Ellie had written about in her journal in 1984. The only documented survivor of the 1943 fire at the Winthrop Mill. Michael Halperin had been little more than a footnote in Ellie's journal, a mystery man tied to a 1943 fire no one wanted to talk about. But now, nearly 40 years after her disappearance, he had become the center of the investigation. Detectives tracked down old institutional records from Northbrook Mental Health Center, a state facility that closed in 2006. Among the files was a patient intake form from 1986, 2 years after Ellie vanished. Name: Michael R. Halperin. Age: 44. Admitted for schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suspected dissociative episodes. The notes mentioned repeated references to fire voices and the girl under the stairs. Most chilling of all, under place of origin. He had written Westover, Pennsylvania. Police obtained a court order to exhume records from the closed facility and found a small collection of Halperin's personal belongings that had never been claimed. Among them was a cracked leather journal. Inside were drawings, dozens of them. Most were indecipherable, spirals, eyes, fire. But one page showed a crudely drawn figure of a girl with long hair, standing inside what appeared to be the Winthrop Mill. Scribbled next to the image were the words: "She saw the light. She walked in. She stayed." Investigators now believed Michael Halperin may have been living in the mill in 1984, and could have been the last person to see Ellie alive. But there was one huge complication. Halperin had died in 2012 of natural causes. No living suspect to question. No confession. Just fragmented writings and a haunting connection to both the fire in 1943 and Ellie's disappearance. Still, detectives pressed forward. They began re-examining the mill's history, and what they uncovered changed everything. Official records had long stated that the fire in 1943 was caused by faulty wiring. But fire marshal reports from the era, buried deep in microfiche at the county records office, told a different story. The fire had started in the basement, not the east wing. And it wasn't caused by electrical failure. It was arson. An anonymous letter had been sent to the fire marshal's office just days after the incident. In it, the writer claimed that people were being punished for what happened down there. No other context. The letter was dismissed as nonsense at the time. But now, with Halperin's name resurfacing, detectives began to consider a horrifying possibility. What if Michael Halperin had been a child living or hiding inside the mill in 1943? What if he had witnessed something so terrible it fractured his mind? And what if, in 1984, when Ellie came looking for answers, Halperin was still there? A few townspeople remembered rumors from the 60s and 70s, stories about a shadow man who roamed the property at night. Most believed it was just a homeless person, but some described hearing him talk to himself. Others claimed he would sing old lullabies in the dark. A search of tax records revealed something even more bizarre. The land the mill stood on had been sold in 1981, for just $1, to a man named Robert Halperin, Michael's brother. Robert had died in 1991. There were no heirs. But detectives now believed the Halperin family had deliberately kept the mill off the radar, preventing it from being torn down or fully inspected, possibly to protect Michael, who had been squatting there for years. The picture began to take shape. Ellie, ever curious, had tracked down the mystery of the Winthrop Mill. She entered the building alone on a cold November evening. Inside, she encountered someone, Michael Halperin, now middle-aged, disturbed, and fiercely territorial. Something happened. She was trapped, or locked away. For days, maybe longer, she was alive. Writing. Hoping. Then silence. If Michael Halperin had kept her hidden, it would explain the total absence of remains or clothing found in the initial search. If he had staged her final resting place years later, after the building began collapsing, it would explain the contradiction in structural records. And that gold wristwatch? Forensic analysis showed that it had not been exposed to the elements for more than a few years. Its ticking mechanism had been maintained, cleaned, even wound manually. Someone, perhaps Michael before he died, had kept it and placed it there, like a message or a memorial. Despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, prosecutors knew they couldn't file charges against a dead man. Michael Halperin would never stand trial, never face cross-examination, never confirm or deny his role in Ellie Blackwood's final hours. But law enforcement officials and forensic psychologists reached a consensus, based on Ellie's recovered note, the positioning of her remains, the watch's condition, the photographs, and Halperin's documented mental illness. He had likely held Ellie captive, whether intentionally or in some disturbed, protective delusion. To Ellie's parents, the answer was both a gift and a curse. For 39 years, Frank and Diane Blackwood had lived in a purgatory of not knowing, unsure if their daughter had run away, been murdered, or simply vanished. The return of her remains allowed for a burial, a headstone, a place to grieve. But it also opened a wound they tried to keep closed. She wasn't just lost, Diane said quietly at the press conference. She was trapped. And no one heard her. The town of Westover held a vigil outside the now-sealed Winthrop Mill that fall. Hundreds came. Some remembered Ellie as the bright-eyed girl from high school. Others only knew her as a photo on a faded flyer. But her story, once a whispered rumor, had become something else, a shared scar. A reminder. In the months that followed, the town council voted to demolish the mill entirely. Structural crews arrived with excavators and bulldozers. But before they began, an archaeologist and forensic team were allowed one final sweep. What they found wasn't evidence. It was a shrine. Hidden deep within a brick-off boiler room was a small, hand-built space lined with newspaper, soft fabric, and candles, long melted down. At the center, surrounded by broken toys and bits of string, was a rusted nameplate. It read, Eleanor. Psychologists interpreted the shrine as a sign of ritualized guilt, possibly Halperin's way of honoring Ellie after she died, or trying to keep her memory alive. Some theorized he may have believed he was protecting her. Others saw it as a prison built by a broken man who had never escaped his own childhood trauma. Public reaction was divided. Some viewed Halperin as a monster who let a teenage girl die. Others saw him as a tragic figure, a child victim of a long-forgotten fire, failed by every system that should have helped him. But one thing was clear, Ellie had never truly been forgotten. And thanks to a group of YouTubers exploring a ruin, a ticking watch, and one girl's unwavering curiosity, her voice was finally heard, even from beyond the grave. In the years since, Ellie's story has inspired a scholarship at Westover High for aspiring journalists. The program encourages students to pursue truth, even in places others are too afraid to look. The fund bears her name. The Ellie Blackwood Memorial Award for Fearless Curiosity. And the last line of her recovered journal page, written in shaky, fading ink, has become its motto. If someone ever finds this, tell them I didn't stop asking why.